down. And that law has to be implemented. So we are going to the regulation. We implement this lockdown. This lockdown lives. Very fast. Announced. We had about 61. We have more than 700. As South Africans, life, to take it upon ourselves, ensure that, and the lockdown basically must stay at leave. It's because it is termed as essential services. These are part of that essential. Health people, the people who deal with food, it's all in the regulations. Allowed to move. And the public will only be allowed to move the food or essential. To see a doctor or when you want to go to a pharmacy. But generally, you have to stay at home. And so we've looked at who are the essential services. As I've said, I've mentioned most of them. But also government departments, some will have core staff. Municipalities also, because people will need water. Services like removal of refuse and so on. But how people are going to move to where they need to go. And so the regulations cover all air transport, maritime, the minister responsible. What are the things that cannot be done? Opened and places that will be closed. But it's all lockdown so that we encourage social distance and the pandemic. So there is a whole list of areas where people gather, whether they gather to do meet, it's all there because it's and of course it's going to be also going to open, and it's only those companies goods. Medical supplies and all related. So basically, at home. And the exception for food, because food you need to survive. The exceptions are for health, and pretty much that, and the security forces also supporting and making sure that the law is enforced, but the public is also protected. And there will be directions that will be issued by various ministers that will give some of the details. For an example, there will be directives issued by, I'm just giving one example, by the Minister of Justice around the issue of domestic violence and how it will be dealt with during this time, and so on. So I just wanted to just paint a picture. The details will be given by the various colleagues. But we appeal, like the President did, that we, all of us, individually and collectively, try and adhere to the lockdown. Try and stay at home as much as it's possible. Only under exceptional circumstances should you want to leave. So so that our colleagues can then have to be given under the enforcement, how it's going to be enforced. Basically, stay at home.
The second colleague that I will call, and before I do so, can our colleagues assist us with on law enforcement officers to assist us? For now, to let
good afternoon from the restrictions of movement by the judiciary, the officials responsible for the administration of justice and the clerks and everyone of the Chief Justice. I want to thank them firstly for the work that they have done under these trying and difficult circumstances. Have started and secondly is to state that from where we left in the last press briefing and with the last regulations that of section 36 with certain exceptions as stated by the minister. The regulations will soon be available in the government gazette. And of gazetting the regulations. Gazetted, but if not, of asking questions to the various colleagues who are here. And we also want to confirm there has been processes of cleaning, deep cleaning of some of the correctional centers, the lockdown, and there have been suspected cases from our officials, about 16 now been cleared through processes of that might have traveled outside the country, or those that might have, it was only one contact for the 5 officials. At this stage, all procedures are being followed as guided by the Department of Health in that regard. And we will proceed and continue to do all the measures that are of the inmates who are all in our correctional facilities. Just said that courts will continue to operate in line with the Disaster Management Act, the issues related to the disaster, to deal with urgent matters that may be necessary during this period, to deal with matters of domestic violence and other matters that might only be relevant or necessary. That regard will also be published. This is to enable for the smooth running of the trying times from the NPA, from all our officials, and there will be those that will be declared essential for the purposes of assisting the administration of justice in that regard. And some of the services that we will continue to serve during this time relates to the Master's Office, letters of authority for people who might need insurances, necessity the Master's Office. And the rest will have to be postponed up until there is normality in any given situation. And as I've said, directives will be issued, but as we speak now, measures have been put in place for postponement of cases through an all-audio visual remand centers and correctional centers linked to the magistrates' courts, which are currently being used and they will continue to be used. All matters where accused are kept in our correctional facilities will be remanded in absentia for the period of the lockdown. They will not, we will not be transporting any inmates to the courts during that period. We will only do so if there is a need for any kind of postponement in the correctional center. It will be done through the audio postponement video conferencing, which we have in about 46 of the courts and 46 of the correctional centers across the country, which we believe in the meantime they will enable us to be able to respond to the issues that are there with regard to the inmates not traveling unnecessarily. So they will therefore be also sitting and they will be not travel during this lockdown period. This is put deliberately to emphasize the issues of preventative measures, screening, improving personal and environmental hygiene, the provision of all other personal equipments, sanitization and decontamination of all the centers, including some of the courts facilities during this period of lockdown. So during that period, because the courts will be used for albeit limited activities, there will also be measures that are put in place in relations to entrances, cleaning, hand washing, and all the necessary measures as advised by the Department of Health. And I think I will just stop there. For now, we will deal with the questions as and when they arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I now call on the Minister of Police, Minister Dos. Minister Expire.
Thank you very much, my colleagues, media, the community out there and everybody. Not much to say today, except to say somebody will read the list of permitted things. I'll read the list of prohibited things. That would be on Action D on the regulations as signed by the Minister of Culture and gazetted. Places and premises closed to the public. The following places and premises are closed to the public. Any place or premise normally open to public where religious, cultural, sporting, entertainment, recreational, exhibitional, organizational, or similar activities may take place. Prohibited. Any place or premise normally open to the public where goods other than essential goods are procured, acquired, disposed, or sold. Any place or premise normally open to the public, such as public parks, beaches, and swimming pools, flea markets, open-air food markets, fairs and bazaars. I don't know exactly what's that, but I'll see it written. Fairs and bazaar, and I'll know it's closed. Nightclubs, casinos, hotels, lodges, guest house, except to the extent that they are required to remain because they have tourists. I can explain this later. Private and public game reserves, except those that they are still tourists. Holiday resorts, except to the extent that they are required to remain tourists confined to such holiday resort. On consumption premises, including taverns, ship-ins, shisanyama, where liquor is sold. This time we are not buying liquor between 9 and 6. You shall not buy liquor. I'm sure that makes life easy for all of us. Off-consumption premises, including bottle stores where liquor is sold. Off-consumption areas in supermarkets where liquor is sold. When you go to these supermarkets, there are portions that sell liquor. They shall not. I know that some of them, they've got a tendency of moving their liquor to the main shelves. If we find anybody coming out there with that liquor, ingozi yodwa. Theaters and cinemas, shopping malls and centers, excluding grocery stores and pharmacies, and taxi ranks, bus depots, train stations, and airports. Minister will expand on that. Restaurants shall not operate. There shall be no food at restaurants. You buy food from these outlets and go and cook home. So there is no need to be on the road. There is no need to move around. There is no need to move around. There was a little bit of a story earlier on that you can walk your dogs. There shall be no dogs that will be walked. The cluster met, discuss, and we agreed that it doesn't enhance the call made by the president. If you do really want to walk your dog around your house, it ends there. It can't go beyond that. The main act of the Disaster Act says that the movement of the alcohol or liquor can be restricted. There shall be no movement of the liquor from point A to point B. If you find the liquor in your boot, that's illegal. That's crime. So, which means what you have at your home, you will consume it there, not next door. There shall be no movement. To show that you are serious, it tells us that if you break these laws or these regulations, we are 6 months in or fined or both. In KZN, 2 people have been charged already, charged with attempt around have to move and act very harsh on you. We hope we'll work together here, because one other thing we need to do is to open the spaces when this virus gets worse. Not having alcohol will make people not to be involved and cause road accidents, will make people not to stab one another because they get drunk first and they stab one another and shoot one another. So they'll open space in hospitals to make sure that we deal with these matters. Lastly, we have not forgotten that there might be a response or negative response to people when they are put in their houses, and increase the question of abuse. We have increased our units that deal with the matters of women and children abuse, and we will make a call to say those people can have the number and phone when they are abused to the number 0800 150 150. Those that will be feeling that they are being abused, especially the abuse of women and children, they can call to this number. The police will respond. And then ordinary crime that you see, they will call 10-111. You know that is happening. Exactly operations will be explained later, but the police and in the support of the SNDF, we are ready to make sure that these things we talk about of complete non-movement will be implemented and will be implemented accordingly. For 21 days, please stay sober.
Thank you, Minister Cele. We will now call upon Minister of Defense, Minister Ngakula.
Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu. Colleagues, following the announcement by the Commander-in-Chief of the South African National Defence Force, President Ramaphosa, on the 23rd of March, of the measures to combat the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent declaration of the national lockdown period starting midnight tomorrow, the President and the Commander-in-Chief has accordingly directed the South African National Defence Force to be deployed in support of the South African Police Service in ensuring that the measures we are announcing are implemented. The national lockdown is definitely not meant to punish citizens by restricting their movements, but it is meant to contain and minimize the spread of this virus. Now, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa of 1996 mandates the South African National Defence Force to defend and protect the Republic, its territorial integrity, and its people in order to preserve life, health, and properties in emergency and humanitarian relief operations. In accordance with the regulations issued in terms of Section 27(2) of the Disaster Management Act, the South African National Defence Force must, for the duration of the national disaster, state of disaster, within its available resources, do all of the following. You'll see that 27(2)B of the National Disaster Act allows for the President to release personnel or the minister, personnel of a national organ of state for the rendering of emergency services. It is on that basis that the Commander-in-Chief has called on the South African National Defence Force to deploy. And you'll see 27.2F, talks to regulation of movement of persons and goods to and from or within the disaster-stricken or threatened area. It is on the basis of that we will providing support to members of the South African Police Service in roadblocks, in foot patrols throughout the country to enforce the curfew. Of course, part of the work which will be done will be border safeguarding activities in areas where ports of entries, you'll hear that Minister of Home Affairs has shut down some of the ports of entry. There are some ports where air, land, and maritime ports are being shut down. And in this instance, the SANDF will show that there are no unauthorized entries at the closed ports of entries during this lockdown. The South African Military Health Services, as mentioned by the President, under essential services, continue to work together with all health authorities under the direction of the Minister of Health to provide essential health services to public through its health practitioners. A team of the South African National Army, in conjunction with the provincial joint operation centers and other state departments, will deploy static guards at quarantine sites, delivery points, mobile and foot patrols throughout the country to enforce curfew and restrict movement of people, and supported by roadblocks, road closures, cordon and search. And in line with the call by the Commander-in-Chief, we reiterate to all South Africans to stay at home for the duration of the lockdown. Now, I think I should say this as I take my seat. We've received a number of videos on chat groups and social media generally. Some people are very positive about the deployment of the South African National Defence Force and its capacity, but some people have begun to spread rumor about what it is likely to do, to a point of using old videos. Some of them have been photoshopped about what is currently going on. In fact, ladies and gentlemen of the media, you have not seen a deployment of the South African National Defence Force yet. There hasn't been deployment. What we have seen is movement of soldiers from point A to point B to the assembly points. There is no deployment whatsoever. So some of the videos which you see, which have come through, it's actually fake news. And I'm sure Minister Tembu will further announce this to you and confirm tomorrow. At 4:30, the Commander-in-Chief will be addressing some of the forces we'll be deploying in the province of Gauteng. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now we are learning. We are in a learning curve. We were not born during coronavirus. Getting to know this virus now we are advised that moving forward, after each person or minister has spoken, let's sanitize the area. Now that is good advice. We are getting this from social media. Now we are a listening nation. We are a listening government. Having said that, can we now call Minister of Home Affairs? Ngiyakunceda-ke baba. Thank you.
You're making the place wet, man.
That's for your safety and our safety.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think I mentioned that the exponential rise number of South Africans who test positive for 19 is leaving everybody in the country. And as you know, from countries regarded as epicenters of the disease, so it is to be expected that many South Africans will be suspicious and be on their tenterhooks whenever they come across anybody who is from such a country, or even remote. So I think before I mention measure, pretend some of the social media in the past few days, because I think this is specifically Chinese and Japanese nationals. Over the weekend, social media were awash with pictures of supposed Chinese people inside the building at the Lebombo border post on the Mozambican side. By the way, the Mozambican side is called Resano Garcia. These Chinese were supposed to be making their way into South Africa, robbed first officials, and they were doing so because they were supposed to have been refused entry at the OR Tambo International Airport, and they are supposed to have flown to Mozambique with the purpose of coming to South rounds. Post. Some of us who have been there could see immediately. And I want to read one of the posts. Chinese here entering South Africa via Mozambique after OR Tambo denied them entry. Our country is a banana republic. These Chinese nationals are buying their way into the country. Where is Home Affairs and the police? This is treasonous. I want to state categorically that this is fake news. That picture was not taken in Resano Garcia. We even went to an extent of asking the manager of that post. We sent him the pictures, and he confirmed that this is not his area, those who have seen the pictures. Now, you have been told that fake news is a criminal offense. Now, here is somebody who's calling our country a banana republic and saying the country is acting treasonously when the person knows that the picture they are sending around is photoshopped. Now, what are the true facts? The true facts are that on Friday, 20th March, an aircraft carrying 150 people landed at OR Tambo International Airport. It was definitely from China. Amongst them, there were 80 South African students who were allowed to disembark, and they are being quarantined in Ikuruleni, as Minister Blade Nzimane said yesterday. But there were also 70 Chinese on board. They were indeed refused entry, but they couldn't go to Mozambique because, remember, Mozambique was already closed for any aircraft from South Africa. So they were instructed to go back from China, and their aircraft indeed departed OR Tambo International Airport at 15 hours 01, 1 minute past 3, on that very same Friday, 20 March 2020. It landed with all of them on board at Shenzhen in China at 08 hour 50 on Sunday, the 21st of March, before continuing to Beijing on the same day. So it was with shock that some of us saw this picture that they are in Mozambique, because the air traffic controllers showed us pictures when they followed them until they passed Madagascar airspace, and we know that we were gone. So by some magic, they are back in Mozambique buying their way out through corrupt officials. Now, I want to state here that these fake news tend to be more dangerous sometimes, even as much as the virus itself, because it worries people. So because of this, and because we are in possession of the original source of the pictures, I've instructed my officials to go and lay a charge with the police. And this is the first test case of whether fake news, people posting fake news can be charged or not. We are going to charge these ones. And we have identified at least 3 of them. The second story was about Japanese. On Sunday, the 27th of March, another story went viral on social media, and I think it was driven by the first one, showing what fake news can do to people. Because there was this belief about Chinese which were not there. The second story was very unfortunate, about Japanese who also flew into Mozambique and were buying their way through the Lebombo border post. When they were on their way to OR Tambo, they were stopped at Machata Top. This was a very unfortunate event. The Japanese who were accosted were 24 in number. Where do they come from? They are employees of the Japanese Cooperation Agency. They've been in Mozambique since May last year. They never went anywhere. They never left Mozambique. They were due to leave in May this year because they are on a one-way contract. On March 20th, the Embassy of Japan asked for assistance of the Republic of South Africa to facilitate their transit through OR Tambo to go back to Japan. And because Japan is not on the list of high-risk countries, this request, which went through DECO, was acceded to. And we arrived, and they even sent us the list and individual profiles of each one of them. When they arrived at the border post, they were checked against the list given by the Japan embassy. And it was found that they were same people, and they were let through. I think police were led by members of the public. And I must praise the police for acting. I'm not condemning them, even though it was unfortunate. They were acting in accordance with the rules, that because they were told that these are Chinese and they are not allowed in the country. But after it has been explained to them, they allowed them to pass, and indeed they left for Japan on 03:30 on the 23rd of March, and they landed in Japan. Now let me come back to the lockdown. For Home Affairs, there are 2 issues: the issue of travel and the issue of issuing documents. For travel, we wish to report, as you remember, when the Commander-in-Chief, President Ramaphosa, declared the country to be in a state of disaster, we closed I'm having some disturbance because I'm hearing something when I thought everything is quiet. We closed 35 border posts and we're left with 18. Now, I want you to understand very well. During that time, there was no lockdown, and that's why we allowed the 13 border posts to continue normally. Now there is a lockdown. People are not to move. So we have taken a decision that the remaining 18 border posts will continue to allow movement of goods and essential services, but will be totally closed to the movement of people. Let me repeat this. In the 18 border posts, because I remember there was a headline about Beit Bridge, including Beit Bridge, they will continue conveying goods between South Africa and our neighboring countries, but no human beings will be allowed there for the next 21 days. Those who are coming into South Africa, we are aware that there are many nationals in our neighboring country who get health care from South Africa. They will make a special arrangements with Home Affairs to come and make use of our health services, both public and private. So it will be a special arrangement. Otherwise, ordinarily, there will be no movement of people around our borders. Now, the civic division deal with essential documents, and when I came here, I had some people asking through the radio, through one of the radio stations, what Home Affairs is going to offer. I think it's good for me to answer that question. Home Affairs will have a skeleton staff, and for the purpose of issuing 2 types of documents, and only 2, unless there is some emergency which I could not yet fathom. Firstly, Home Affairs will issue temporary IDs for those who have lost their IDs and need to make transactions, for instance, maybe with the bank or any other transaction that is essential during these 21 days. So it's only a temporary ID. There will be no application for new IDs during these 21 days. So only those who apply for a replacement because theirs is lost. Secondly, we'll issue replacement birth certificates to those who lost them. For instance, if a child needs child support from SASSA and they've lost their birth certificate and SASSA wants it, we will issue that. It is important for me to mention why only these two documents. We are issuing them because it's safe to do so. Because they are repeats, we can easily check them against HANIS or Home Affairs National Identification System, which is a biometric system. And we can also easily check them against an NPR, which is the National Population Register. Anybody who is applying for an ID, HANIS, they are not on the National Population Register, we won't be able to serve them until the 21 days are over. It won't be safe because we won't issue passports at all because there's no movement of people anywhere. We won't issue any new ID. We won't issue any new birth certificate. We won't issue any marriage certificate, new or old, because there won't be any emergency. You can wait until the 21 days. Maybe the 21 days will also give you time to think whether you want to get married or not. It will be a good time to reflect. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, the government printing works falls under Home Affairs. All these documents I've mentioned are printed by the government printing works, including some government cassettes and some other government documents. So for that reason, government printing works will remain with skeleton staff for the purpose of printing all these documents, which I said will be printed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. The next minister we are going to call, thank you very much. The next minister we are going to call is a minister who's called Razmatas. Minister Fikile Mbalula, Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Minister Mtembu. We are no longer razzmatazing, we are fixing. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, fellow cabinet ministers. In announcing the nationwide lockdown, the President indicated that provision will be made for essential transport services to continue, including transport for essential staff and for patients who need to be managed elsewhere. The measures we are announcing today are in line with this provision and injunction, while ensuring that the objective of the lockdown is achieved. Rail. All long-distance passenger rail services, both public and private, will stop operations for the duration of the lockdown. Services of Shosholoza Mail, Premier Class Air, and Blue Train operated by PRASA and Transnet respectively have already been suspended. The new regulations mean that private rail operators, such as Rovos Rail, will also cease operations. All commuter rail services will shut down for the duration of the lockdown. This includes all metro rail and Gautrain services. Aviation. All international and domestic flights are prohibited, irrespective of the risk category of the country of origin. Only essential air cargo will be allowed. However, cargo from high-risk country must be sanitized. Maritime, the ban on cruise ships calling at any of our seaports will be strictly enforced. As you will all know that the ban has now been enforced since from last week, and it will actually continue. Essential cargo will be allowed at our 8 seaports. However, cargo from high-risk countries must be sanitized. Taxis, minibus taxis. As part of the relief measures for small businesses in distress, as announced by the President, those taxis that have been financed by the National Taxi Finance, administered by the Small Enterprise Finance Agency, SIFA, will be granted a 3 months repayment holiday. Commercial banks are also considering similar measures. Minibus taxis will be allowed to transport essential services, workers, and those allowed to make the necessary permitted movements. Transport movements in this regard will be allowed to operate from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. and again in the afternoon from 16 hours to 20 hours. I want to repeat, transport movements in this regard will be allowed to operate from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. daily, and in the afternoon again from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock p.m. closed. Operators should put measures in place to adhere to social distancing in order to curb the spread of the virus. All minibus taxis must be sanitized after every trip. All taxi ranks must be sanitized at regular intervals. Where appropriate, government will provide assistance. Metered taxis and e-hailing. Metered taxis and e-hailing meaning Uber. That's the only thing I think is popular, that many people know. But besides that, there is Bolt and many other services in terms of e-hailing. Vehicles will be allowed to transport essential services workers and those allowed to make the necessary permitted movements. Transport movements in this regard will be allowed to operate from 5 to 9 and again from 16 hours to 20 hours. Metered taxis and e-hailing vehicles must be sanitized after each and every journey. The industry will take responsibility for this. Where appropriate, government will assist. The number of passengers each vehicle is allowed to carry will be reduced. A vehicle licensed to carry up to 4 people will only be permitted to load 1 person. A vehicle licensed to carry up to 8 passengers will only be permitted to load a maximum of 3 passengers. Sanitizers used in all taxi vehicles must have a minimum of 60% alcohol content. Buses, Minister of Police says, when I say alcohol. Buses, limited bus operations will only be allowed for purposes of rendering essential services. Limited bus operations will only be allowed for purposes of rendering essential services. Cross-border road transport. All cross-border road passenger movements will be prohibited for the duration of the lockdown. Cross-border freight movement for essential goods will continue to and from our neighboring countries. During the lockdown period, most services rendered by our entities will be suspended. Vehicle testing centers and driver's license testing centers will be closed. Should your driver's license expire during the duration of the lockdown, it shall be deemed to remain valid until the end of the lockdown, with a grace period of renewal within 14 working days thereafter, unless otherwise determined. We will maintain skeleton staff for purposes of safe road operations, clearing of accidents, maintenance of tunnels, as well as road traffic enforcement. In addition to the measures I've outlined, as a Minister of Transport, I'm empowered by the Disaster Management Act regulations to issue directions. I will therefore issue directions covering the following areas: movement of cargo, aviation, maritime, road, including cross-border. This will cover measures such as prohibition of crew change and movement of essential cargo across all our modes of transport, limiting movement of allowed essential public transport to specific times, which times we have said it is 5 a.m. to 9 in the morning and 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the afternoon. Movement of cross-border road transport. Many people have been asking about freight on the road, and we will also be issuing directions in that regard. Suspension of services rendered by our entities. Closure of vehicle testing centers and driver's license testing centers. Expiry of driver's licenses. We are encouraged by the positive response to the existing regulations by all stakeholders. This includes sanitization of taxis and surfaces by the taxi industry, and initiatives by e-hailing providers to assist with transportation relating to healthcare logistics. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The next minister that we will call to come and speak to us is the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition. You want to speak, Baba? Are you okay? You'll just take questions. And I know why the minister is not coming forward, because he did speak to South Africa. But he has come here in the event that there are questions that will arise coming from the regulations that have now been crafted by our colleagues to enforce the lockdown. Now, we are, of course, similarly, the Minister of Health is here to do the same as well. So that, but of course, let's give the Minister of Health an opportunity to speak so that after that, we are able to take questions. Minister Zweli Mkhize.
Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu, colleagues. Just a couple of issues which one wants to deal with and clarify. The first one refers to the point that has been raised by Minister Cele about the walking and the jogging and so on. We had actually responded to this question in the morning, and the response was in line with the thinking at the time. We have seen the distraction that this whole debate has had. So we actually asked that the matter needs to be rediscussed. And of course, the position as it stands now is that to avoid any sort of position. In the past week, the issue was we need to, there was a limitation of the sale of alcohol, but now there's a prohibition. The real reason in it is the concern we have that people will think that the lockdown is going to sort the virus out. And we're very worried that change. Our biggest problem and the real risk which we want to outline for the public is that when people are indoors, not walking out, staying inside, but they congregate in large numbers and to, organize lots of alcohol, the behavior actually predisposes for all of the people to be easily infected. It only takes one person to actually spread the infection. In China, a large number of people were infected, were in household settings. So we want to urge our people that we're limiting movement so that we reduce the chance of people getting now. It is not the lockdown only. In the homes, the precautions and no, you don't spread. Keeping safe distance still remains very important. I want to therefore commend the police for their swift action. We've had a case that has been reported already in the media where someone ignored the call to quarantine. We've always been saying if anybody does not on their own submit to quarantine, they'll be enforced. Now they've been charged. So we want to send a message again. Please respond. If we ask you to quarantine yourself, you will be forced if you don't actually, if you don't. Same issue goes for those who are asked sure that people who have been in contact with individuals, as it were, as we deal with. Part of the problem we're worried about, people are already moving from different provinces to their own homes. We have a lot of vulnerable people out there. The elderly are very vulnerable. We actually don't want to see old people getting infected. Even if it's one person, it can actually be very devastating. The elderly are very vulnerable. A lot of people who are immunosuppressed, who are on antiretroviral treatment, or those who are on cancer therapy, and those who have got underlying diabetic conditions, and a whole lot of those. Those need to be to understand that it's in your own interest to avoid any form of exposure. To actually us from the health side, the restrictions actually assist, but at the end of the day, taking personal responsibility for your health, taking personal responsibility for the health of others is actually very, very important. I want to stop there, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. There's been a change of heart. We are now calling back Minister Patel. Come, Minister. Thank
you. Thank you very much, colleague. I think as Minister Dlamini Zuma indicated, the regulations have been developed based on a health assessment and to enable the police to enforce the regulations. We call on the business community, large businesses, small businesses, informal traders, to work with us to contain the spread of the virus so that we can win this war. We are working with businesses to keep supply chains running, to keep key production and retail flowing in the food sector, in cleaning and hygiene products, in medical goods and equipment, in fuel, and in basic goods like airtime and electricity. 28 categories of essential services have been published in the Government Gazette. Local companies are also looking to repurpose their technologies to provide locally made basic products wherever this is possible to avoid any shortages caused by disruptions in imported lines. For example, local companies are developing an easy-to-use mechanical ventilator for hospitals that will be going into production shortly, and we expect to have hundreds of these available within weeks. The regulations provide for a form or certificate to be issued by companies in essential services to their workers to be carried when traveling to and from work. Many companies have requested that they log their details with government. We've introduced a portal at the website run by the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission, the CIPC, to log in company details only where you comply with the list that has been gazetted by my colleague. The website is www.bizportal.co.za, www.bizportal.co.za. The service will be introduced from tomorrow, and full details will be published on government websites. Finally, to give effect to the regulations issued on prices, the Competition Commission and the Consumer Commission are charging individuals and firms who are increasing prices unjustifiably. And the commissions will now come forward. They will be represented by Commissioner Mabuza and Commissioner Bonakele and make a short statement on the actions that they are taking. May I, through my colleague, invite the two commissioners immediately to come forward.
Siqhubeke nale sanitizer ngiyazi ukuthi asikayijwayelanga asiqhubeke we will call upon the Commissioner Mabuza, who's our national consumer, who's heading the National Consumer Commission. We are ready so that she comes to support the work that Minister Patel has spoken to. Commissioner, we are in your hands.
Thank you, Ministers. Colleagues, as we had said yesterday that the Minister has given us a mandate to enforce the regulation, and we had promised that we are really going to take swift action against those suppliers that are not complying. As of yesterday, we have for now commissioned 30 investigations. The 30 investigations are between the two entities. But for the National Consumer Commission, we have issued 11 certificates as of yesterday. The first one went to Spy in Silver Lakes in Gauteng for the price of Dettol, Spy in Platterkloof for hand sanitizers, North Safety in Western Cape for face masks, Checkers Hyper in Captain Park for toilet paper, National Overalls in Pretoria, Gauteng for face masks, Macro in Durban for toilet paper, Bloemfontein Pharmacy in Free State for hand gloves, Mopane Pharmacy in Mpumalanga in Bombela for face masks, Seaside Pharmacy in Table View in the Western Cape for face masks, and then Pick n Pay in Milnerton in Western Cape for hand sanitizers. We have, as of today as well, also issued 8 additional certificates which have not yet been confirmed by the receivers. That include 4 in Gauteng, 1 in KZN, 2 in Northwest, and 1 in Limpopo. What we had said is that the two commissions, we are working together, pulling our forces together so that we ensure that if we are looking at these prices, we find that there will be prices upstream, then my colleague in the Competition Commission will take charge. If it's upstream, then I will be taking charge. But we are working together in terms of our forces, and my colleague will come in and continue from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Mabuza. What was this sanitizer for? Commissioner Bonakele is from the Competition Commission. He will speak to us again clarify us what work they will be doing to enforce the lockdown and ensure that our people are not taken advantage of. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu. Ministers, I will take this opportunity once more to remind ourselves, members of the public and the business community, that the Competition Act prohibits excessive pricing. Also, the National Consumer Protection Act prohibits price gouging. This is where prices become so unreasonable that they cannot be justified. The Competition Commission, together with the National Consumer Commission, during this disaster, have continued to receive a number of complaints regarding shocking price increases, mainly for the protective gear used for COVID-19. But we have also noted lately that this has tended to include basic food products like rice, maize meal, cooking oil, and cereals. Following the regulations that were published and directives by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition to strengthen competition and consumer protection enforcement during this national disaster, we have followed up this by communication and engagements with national retailers especially. We have sent a letter to national retailers, all of them, requesting them. I nearly said directing them, but I think this is reserved for ministers. But requesting them to notify us of any abnormal increases. So far, we have not received any notification of these, but complaints continue to pile up. Now, I don't want to be presumptive, but if we do not get notification from retailers as to what is the cause of these price increases, we have to assume that it is them that are profiteering and exploiting the circumstances. We have also been monitoring commodity trading within SafeX, and we saw yesterday an unusual upsurge in the price of white maize. We have followed this up. We are monitoring all of these commodity prices. We have been advised that partly the market has been absorbing the cost of the depreciation in the rand, as well as an unusual demand coming from Zimbabwe. We have seen that the prices have somewhat stabilized today. And as I have indicated, we continue to monitor. Ultimately, it is our duty as regulators to advise government when markets don't work. In other words, if there is a complete market failure, this is the reality. Government will have no choice but to impose further restrictions on operations of the market. We have been advising authorities, in particular ministers, that at this stage, there is no need to do this. We do have products in the market. For example, there is no shortage of essential food products. The issue is that these must move normally through the value chain without abuses. if there is further abuse that is impossible to control, then government will have to reconsider its position. So we do join the minister in calling upon business community, particularly the large businesses, because they really sell the bulk of these products. So the large supermarket chains, the large franchises, for example, who operate shops at the forecourts of garages. This is where we have been finding abuses. Of course, there have been abuses by smaller players, individually owned pharmacies, small suppliers of masks and things like that. But really, the huge impact on consumers and the economy will come from the large retailers and suppliers. This is why we are emphasizing the call on these. And incidentally, if there is strict government regulation, it is these large enterprises that would suffer the most and will complain the most. So we call upon CEOs of retail stores, CEOs of franchise operators to continue working with government. We also call upon members of the public to let us aware of these, as we will continue working during the lockdown period to monitor prices and to fast-track investigations of those who transgress both laws and regulations. Our toll-free number that we are jointly operating, the Competition Commission and the National Consumer Commission, is 0800 014 880. 0800 014 880. Alternatively, a mobile number which is available 24 hours at 084 743 0000. I repeat again, the mobile number is 084 743 0000. We, as my colleague have indicated, has a joint team that reports to both of us, and we will continue operating during this period. We would call upon once more the business owners to make it easy for our people as they move in and out of their retail shops, as well as cooperate in informing us of any changes that are unusual in the markets. Thank you very much.
We will now call upon the last presenter so that she clarifies what are we going to do with some issues that have been raised here. Minister Lindiwe Zulu.
Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu. The first thing that we would like to make emphasis on is that every South African is indispensable to helping us get rid of the virus. And so from us who are responsible for social services is to call on our members or those that are receiving social grants to do the best that they can to comply. Yesterday, when we made our presentation, we did say that the regulations will be adopted, and we want them to really do the best they can to comply according to the regulations. We, of course, are going to work closely with the Minister of Justice in particular and the police to just make sure that when it comes to issues of violence against women and children, the attention is given, because we did mention that when people are at home and everybody is at home, sometimes the tempers rise. This is not the time for people to really engage in abusing women and children or abusing anybody. This is just not the time for that. Again, we give the number for the GBV Command Center is 0800 428 428. That is the number that we have. We also would like to indicate that our recipients of social grants, we will know that there were questions that were indicating that we announced the increase on social grants. Will these social grants be affected, and will the increase happen or not? Yes, that increase will happen, as was indicated when the Minister of Finance presented the budget. I don't want to go back into what the figures are. I think everybody knows of those figures. I think what is also important for us to indicate that social grant pay points at cash points, payment schedules provided by Net Joint for Planning by SNDF and SAPS. SASSA will deploy at least one manager to each pay point to assist with the queue management and to attend to queries. Staff will have protective gear, that is masks and gloves, and carry hand sanitizers. SAPO has committed to having hand sanitizers for all clients will be sanitized. We really request that they comply again. We don't want arguments at the place. Everybody must appreciate that they must comply. Security staff will be equipped with masks and everything. Additional cash dispensers will be deployed to high volume points. That's one of the questions that were asked. And the Post Bank call center is available 24/7, is 0800 535455 to deal with concerns and complaints related to SASSA, SAPO cards, and card replacement. The other number that we didn't give yesterday was the SASSA call center, is 0800 601011, will be available, although there may be reduced capacity. I think those were the most important things that we needed to say here. And the issue of transport is a problem. Everyone is talking about how will SASSA recipients be transported, and we've been asked if we're going to be of assistance. Yes, where there is distress, we need to step up and make sure that we support. But as Minister of Transport has indicated, everybody has to comply. Thank you.
That was the last presentation, and again, it was necessary for us to impart this information so that all of us as South Africans are on the same page. We know that it has taken quite some time because we have had many ministers speaking, but it's our duty to inform the nation, particularly under these circumstances of lockdown, but more importantly, under these circumstances where all of us as a nation are standing together to ensure that we flatten the curve of infections and contain the spread of coronavirus. That's what we're about, to protect lives and to save lives. That's why we're here. Having said that, the next session now is the question time. Is the question time. We will start there, that side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then next, when we come, we start there, we go that way. Just relax for now. We will come to you. Don't call us, we will call you. Number 1.
Okay. In the meantime.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. I just want a clarity on where does the lockdown put... Francis Luagamachate from Progressive Independent News Agency. Sorry, Minister. Where does this lockdown put the informal traders, particularly those running spaza shops in the communities? Will they be operating considering that they also sell some of the goods that are essential, such as groceries? If they are not operating, is there any sort of relief? And the next question will be on the taxis ferrying. Minister Mbalula mentioned that the taxis will be allowed only to ferry those who are considered to be rendering essential services. And those who will be, those who stay in remote areas and wanting to go to shops to buy, how do they get transported then in this lockdown? Thank you.
You have started well. Can we all follow that example? Not more than 2 questions. And no preambles.
FM. My one question was covered with regards to those who work who are in remote areas.
Who are you? I'm Jackson Mtembo.
Snetemba Matolo, Jacaranda FM. Other question still goes to Minister Mbalula. The taxis that are essential services, how do those taxis, e-hailing or otherwise, know which one is essential services, which one is not? Are they just going on faith, I guess? Minister Lamula, are the inmates or have the inmates been tested as well? And this obviously links to the officials that may or may not have the virus. Lastly, Minister Patel, when it comes to
we have agreed on 2. Can you count? 1, 2. No, thank you. Give another person. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Commuter and I'm from Power 987. I just want to find out, with regards to people who may need to travel outside provinces to attend funerals, will they be allowed to do that? And with regards to transport, what about the people who are using private drivers or company drivers to take them to and from work? How is that going to work? Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Minister Peter Du Toit from News 24. Can you or one of your colleagues please clarify the position of journalists during the time period of lockdown, what we will need to move around? Minister of Communication earlier said press cards, ID, and a letter from your company. Minister Tsele said something differently. Can you just clarify what we need to be able to do our jobs? Thank you.
Next.
Hello? Okay. It's Kani Mapanga from News 24. Minister Zulu, I just wanted to clarify, is there an alternative to this GBV command center other than contacting this hotline? There may be some victims of abuse that may not have that resource. Do you have temporary shelters that for people that might want to escape now before this 21-day lockdown and ensure that they're in a safe space? And then for Minister Mbalula, I have a question on behalf of my colleague at Business Insider. We just need clarity on the statement, those allowed to make the necessary permitted movements. Does this include general members of the public that may want to do grocery shopping? Are these the hours that they are permitted to use public transport?
Hello? Hi.
Next, yeah.
This is Bitumela Masihlaho from Travel News Weekly and Tourism Update. My question is for Minister Motsoaledi. You said that all international and domestic flights have been cancelled and that Home Affairs will only issue IDs. With the issuing of visas, those were currently in the process of issuing from when the President announced the national state of disaster. What will happen to those visas at this time?
Next.
Good evening. It's Alex Mitchley from News 24. If we could just maybe clarify on movements be able to make. For instance, people that are separated and have kids, will they be able to move around to drop the kids off? Are there specific times people are allowed to shop? Are people with elderly parents allowed to go visit their parents? Perhaps we can just get total clarity. Is it that you cannot leave the house unless you want to shop or go to the hospital? Or are there other allowances that can be made?
Next.
My name is Aserin Lovu. I'm from Capital Live. I just want to quickly ask Minister Mbalula. Minister, you mentioned that You only mentioned the renewal of licenses, driver's licenses. What about those that booked before this lockdown was announced and their date is within the lockdown? Question number 2 goes to the regulators. Can I quickly ask, tomorrow is the last day to shop whatever, and these other shops like your liquor stores, they will be open. What happens to those that will lift up the prices tomorrow? Are they going to be affected just like the shops that you mentioned earlier? Thank you.
You are the last one this side.
Ministers, my name is Itakani Magwedza from Newsroom Africa. I just want to ask if there are any measures in place to ensure that where people are shopping, there aren't more than 100. And the same goes for funerals as well. Are you in any way policing those?
Is the lady here the last one, this side?
Hi, Nomvelo Chalembera from News 24. With the to Minister Motsoaledi, the Beitbridge border post is currently overcrowded with long lines with people waiting for 12 hours to pass through. Are there any provisions that are going to be made for those who would have been waiting in line tomorrow and probably goes past the lockdown? Or what happens and what is sort of happening, because it's supposed to be social distancing? Are there any health provisions that have been taken with so many people at the border at the moment?
Thank you. We will then request our colleagues to answer. We'll start with any of your colleagues this side. You can use the mic that is next to you to answer the questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'll just talk about the funerals. Funerals obviously are an exception because you can't say people shouldn't bury. But again, during the lockdown, we have to limit the numbers. And in the can only be attended by 50 people. Of course, this is again a problem of people who are together, as you have seen in the church in the Free State or in South Korea, where a lot of people got infected from the church, and people sing, and so it's reduced during the lockdown to 50. Thank you. Oh, and also night vigils are not allowed because for the same reason. So that's what is in the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other colleague this side you want to take a question? Minister Mbalula.
Hello, yes. Question 1 in relation to taxis, transporting people staying in remote areas. I want to explain that in terms of the regulations, all people are actually catered for in terms of public transport, particularly prioritizing essential services. And like I said in my prelude, the President have spoken about that matter of essential transport, and that take into consideration those people will be attending to essential services, hospitals, and if you want to buy groceries and you are staying in a remote area, obviously you'll be catered within the time of 9 o'clock or 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning, and you'll be catered also for, you'll be catered also for 4 o'clock to 8 p.m. In terms of taxis transporting people staying in remote areas. The lockdown that we are in seeks to limit unnecessary movement and that we stay indoors and stay in our homes. So that also have got an impact in transport because you can't commute like business as usual. If you talk about today, in Park Station, people are packing and leaving in numbers. That's exactly what is not needed. That's exactly what is not needed. We don't need jam-packed people in taxis, taxi ranks, and all of that. So it affects every mode of transport. Railway, totally shut down. For essential service, it means if you want to buy grocery, or in any other instance, it could happen that somebody is sick and so on, that will be catered within those hours. Beyond that, that will be necessary movement that will be undertaken in between the hours that we have mentioned. We don't expect any movement of public transport between 9 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and from 4 o'clock to 8 p.m. in the evening. 8 p.m., that's the shutdown. How does a taxi define essential service? Will taxis be allowed to operate between 5 to 9? Yes. Taxis will be allowed to operate for essential service between 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning and also in the evening. So that essential service is what those taxis, minibus taxis, will cater for. With regard to buses, there will be no buses and mass that will be transporting people. It will only be buses that are transporting people to work, let's say ESCOM workers, and those will be going to the hospital. Now, there will be no mass movement of buses like on a normal basis where buses transport people for all different reasons on a daily basis. So that needs to be clear. Accompanying drivers on essential service transport, you can't accompany anyone on essential service transport. You are in a transport because you are going to render essential service. You are either going to work at the hospital or otherwise you are going to a factory that has been defined for essential service. You can't accompany anyone. That is not only discouraged, it is not something that is actually permissible. So if you share transport and you can give a proof that you are going to work for an essential service, it means you are not ferrying anyone, you are simply going to work in terms of your transport. On general members for public transport, general members for public transport are prohibited in terms of movement. Movement that will take place is only for essential service. You are going to buy grocery in the morning, whatever time, or in the afternoon. Transport will transport you for that purpose if you are in a remote area, meaning you will only be transported for that particular purpose. Dates for those who booked and their date fall within the lockdown, there will be no service for driver's licenses and people who are booked. And those who are booked will be redeemed after the lockdown. But if within the lockdown your driver's license has expired, you will not be taken as somebody who doesn't have a driver's license. That will be redeemed after the lockdown. Meaning, colleagues, that is not even an expectation. The lockdown is about limiting our movement, unnecessary movement, and stay where we are. No taxi rank going for any other work except essential service. And that is what these rules are actually about. And that goes also for aviation. There will be no airlines coming from outside expected here, except if it is cargo for essential service. And even in terms of that cargo, our direction is that they will not disembark. If the cargo is disembarking, is being offloaded from the countries that are defined as risk, that cargo must be sanitized. That goes for aviation and maritime. So it's a movement all round of the lockdown. Does not only affect minibus taxis, aeroplanes, and all of that. So the lockdown means that we limit our movement. We stay where we are. The only time we move, it is if there is anything of necessity that says we must move. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Lamon.
Thank you, Minister Mthembu. I hope now South Africans understand why we had to be the last group to brief the nation with regard to the regulations. I think with regard to the question directed to me about inmates, whether they've been tested or not, I'm a bit not very sure to speak about issues of health. I see the Minister of Health has left. But there is a procedure that the Department of Health advises before you can test someone. So correctional services is also being advised by the Department of Health in terms of procedures that they need to follow if there is a suspected case. Firstly, it was a suspected case of officials, which they had to take out and isolate from working with any of the inmates who were then tested. But then it meant that they also needed to isolate the inmates or any other official that might have come into contact with that particular official. I think in terms of the Department of Health, you can then test if that official was found to be positive. But all the officials that have been tested thus far have not been found to be positive. So there was no need to test as per that kind of a procedure that has been put in place as we speak. It is now we're only waiting for the results of the other 5 officials, and there has been measures put in place for any official who came to contact with them, including the inmates who might have come into contact with them in that regard. With regard to the spaza shops, yes, the spaza shops will be allowed to operate, and it is encouraged that you buy in that spaza shop. You must buy nearest to where you are. If you want to go to buy any essential services, your first point of call is that spaza shop. If you are staying anywhere where you are nearest shop, you are encouraged to go to the nearest shop. So that is the reason why the regulation speaks about the limitation of movement. The intention, as everyone has been saying, is to limit unnecessary movement. It's only when that whatever that you may want in the spaza shop or in the nearest shop may not be there, that you can move to any other area nearer to where you are. But you must be able to explain that in case the police meet you along the way and ask you some few questions. So it must be able to be justified. So the purpose of the regulation is that if you want to buy the nearest place to where you are. And if you cannot find it wherever the nearest place, you can then go to the next nearest place of where you might be. So that is the purpose of the regulations in regard to the issue of buying on essential services.
Bob, Tyler.
Thank you very much. The CAN has asked if they will be permitted to cover. You have been doing it. On the discussion, you agree that your appointment cards will be enough to identify yourself to cover the issues around 21 days.
It's called a press card. appointment or press card in their language.
Press card, well, they are appointed. They're appointed by press or by whoever, but they're appointed. If you are not appointed by press, you won't be there. Simple. But there is one issue that was raised, that there are the group of people that are very high on mobility. You might attend 5 events a day. We'll have to monitor that. Because if but at least you know what happens in KZN. Once you know and you proceed to go around, these guys in KZN, they are charged for a very serious thing, attempted murder. So that's serious. So we have to guard against your high mobility, that you might attend 5 events a day and only to find that you are no more a potential carrier, you are. So those are the things that will expect yourself to make some contribution in better understanding one working relationship, be there, but also they will limit themselves. Crowd, so limit themselves, understand that there is a less figure. By the way, one thing has not been explained here. There is no more 100. There is no figure called 100. It's out of the regulations. That's why we deal with 50 when it comes to funerals. Maybe that's a number we have at the present moment. With everybody inside there, not just journalists, but everybody. So, but there's been a big debate that number is too big. As the days go forward, we might revisit even that 50 going forward. So I hope we'll cooperate. The issue here is what has been said. Every individual must stay put where you are, and leaving your place must have a very serious reason. But as the President puts it verbatim, you will have to be on the strictly controlled movement. You will not just feel like going. Even your movement will have to be controlled. Otherwise, we might be a situation that is catastrophic, so we better work now harder so that we've got a better future. Thank you very much.
Minister Motsoaledi.
There were 2 questions for Home Affairs. The first one is, what are we going to do with the people who have already applied for visas before the presidential announcement? I think they'll get them after the 21 days. I've already mentioned that Home Affairs will only process 3 documents: death certificate, replacement ID, replacement birth certificate. So we won't be issuing any visas. We'll only process them after the 21 days. The second question is about Beit Bridge. What happens at Beit Bridge at midnight tomorrow? I'm not sure why the question is about Beit Bridge only, but I must mention that all ports of entry, that includes Beit Bridge, at midnight tomorrow, there will be more movement. Everything will be closed for human beings. Only goods and essential services will pass through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Zulu.
I'm not going to put my... the issue was with regard to alternatives for shelters. May I remind you that we've got over 100 shelters across the country. We also have White Door Safe Places in Kuselega. These are in the regulations. If you go through the regulations, you will realize that they are also essential services and they have to continue operating. But of course, now that we have the regulations, we still have to issue the directive to provide more clarity on how this will work during the lockdown. The command center has the list of contacts, so when anybody makes a call in distress, the command center is able to locate where that person is and then give the directive of what needs to be done. I also would like to say that it's not only just about the issue of the gender-based violence or any form of violence, by the way, because we're saying gender-based violence is a priority for us, but there are other forms of abuse that might happen. We still have to deal with issues of removal of children who are in distress, because this will probably happen. That's the normal thing that we normally do. We still have to work with social workers and so forth and see how we're going to coordinate that. We also have to remind you that we have provincial structures, we have local structures. So everything that we're talking about here, we are in constant contact with the MECs of provinces. And also we are in contact with some of the NPOs that we work with, who, many of whom have stepped up already to say, Minister, where we need to be of assistance to you, we will be able to assist you. We still have to deal with children who are in, who have parents who have custody and visitation rights. We have to deal with what happens then, because some will say 21 days is a very long time, but I think we'll have to find a way of ensuring that parents appreciate and understand that movement itself is a problem, and therefore the movement of the children is going to be difficult, but we know what it is when parents want their children if they have the custody and visitation rights. Thank you.
Minister Patel.
Thank you. There were two questions. The first related to any limits in shopping areas. So I would like to just indicate that the regulation sets out very clearly that there are three conditions that apply in the sale of essential goods. The first one, that a retailer must place controls to ensure that consumers keep a distance of at least 1 meter from each other. So the numbers that come in will vary depending on the size of the store and the arrangements that are made. The second thing is that all stores, all shopping centers and supermarkets selling these goods must follow all directions on the hygienic conditions. Those may be issues like hand sanitizers and so on that applies. The third condition is those retailers that don't only sell food. Some retailers sell a complete range of products. They will be limited only to sell the essential goods that are set out in the regulations, so that it doesn't become a basis to go for a general shopping. We're doing this both to cut numbers and to cut the time that is spent in the store, so that South Africans really, our people all go complete the basic shopping and return home as quickly as possible. The second question related to pricing issues, and Commissioner Mabuza has indicated, and Commissioner Bonakele, that they'd just like to add something. Commissioner Bonakele, if you may come up.
There we are. Engels.
Thank you. We've decided in the interest of time to have a division of labor, so I'll take a question by myself. The question was, what will happen to those shops that increase prices tomorrow? It's important to mention that we recognize that we are in a phase of enforcement, and we will be enforcing the law tomorrow and throughout the national disaster period. That's what we'll be focusing on. We've stopped everything else we do to enforce the laws. Where people need to coordinate in order to ensure that there is adequate supplies, there are various provisions that are available to them, one of which is to apply for an exemption. There are exemptions that have already been given to industry to enable them to coordinate, because we recognize that in times like this, it may be important for people to coordinate. And so some provisions of the law, Competition Act, may have to give way to ensure that there is adequate supply. And Minister Patel has granted a couple of exemptions to the Competition Act to ensure that we have everything that we need. But absolutely, we will enforce whatever happens tomorrow, and whatever happens during the next 21 days will be monitored. Thank you.
I'd like just to add finally that we are looking at the question of opening times of retail stores to limit movements, and we will be talking to the supermarkets about opening early and closing early and then issue directions, and we'll do similar arrangements in respect of spaza shops. As my colleague Minister Lamola has said, we want to encourage people to shop at the local shop, at the spaza shop, to limit movements, so these may also be reflected in the opening hours.
Minister Kara.
Chairperson, because at the end of the day, police will have to do their work, I love to put things clear, black and white. We have one figure at the present moment, is 50, on the question of how many people get there. So the head of policing, Masimula there, and the National Commissioner, until that other figure is determined. The figure that has been given going to funeral is 50. So this one too will stay 50. They'll work with the shop to count, be short in the shop and go. Otherwise, police would not know what to do. I just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We will now take, before we come to you colleagues, let's go to our colleagues in Cape Town. As we said when we started, we have a studio in Cape Town. Number one, Cape Town, ask your questions. We've got 4 people only that are going to ask questions. Number one.
Thank you very much, Minister. It's Marianne Merton from the Daily Maverick. May I start with the first question, which is very simple. What do people have to produce when they are moving to buy groceries or when they go maybe to the pharmacy? Do they need a piece of paper? Is it going to be enough if I go out to go buy groceries? Is it going to be enough if I get stopped by a constable or a sergeant to say, I'm on my way to buy groceries? What are the instructions to police? Can they say to me, ma'am, our instructions are no movement of people, please go home, otherwise I arrest you? We need absolute clarity on that, please. On that point, perhaps the Ministers of Transport and Police may also assist me in clarifying. The Minister of Transport says that there are limitations on public transport in the mornings and the afternoons, and then people can catch taxis and buses for essential services to go grocery shopping, etc., etc. However, Annexure D, as read out by the Police Minister, clearly states that taxi ranks will be closed to the public and bus stations will be closed to the public. How are buses and taxis going to be operating, or are there exemptions in place at this stage? The other question that I have, please can you clarify absolutely simply because there's a lot of speculation going around, especially in the leafy suburbs.
Colleague, we will take your
food
third
delivery
question.
services like Mr. D, Uber Eats, and grocery delivery services be allowed to operate? And my last question really is to the Minister of Justice, please.
Colleague, you are abusing us now. Who's our person in that auditorium? Who's our person in that auditorium? Colleague, you are now abusing us. We only take 2 questions at a time. Now you are on your 4th question. We have got many people who want to ask questions. Thank you very much. We'll consider your first 2 questions. The next one in Cape Town, 2 questions, please.
Jarl from Report newspaper. Can I continue?
Definitely.
Ministers, 5 million people in South Africa, of the South African, that's a third of the South African workforce, are working in the informal sector. I think about 1 million of them are domestic workers, of which probably 50%, at least 50%, are chars who depend on public transport for their livelihoods. They have short wage cycles, weekly wage cycles. You are cutting off, with these regulations, their income. As far as I can see, I see if you really broadly interpret the regulations, you can probably say they are cleaning services. But from Minister Tele's attitude, it seems to me that there's not going to be much discretion on the part of the police people who have to implement these regulations. There are others in the informal sector like reclaimers, waste reclaimers, recycle reclaimers, who move, their livelihoods depend on moving around and collect waste. You are cutting off their income. They similarly have at the most. Can you respond? Because I think
Thank you. You have asked your question.
Big problems with this.
You have asked your question. So it was a question with a preamble, a long preamble. In fact, it's 2 questions. Thank you very much. The third person?
That's it.
The third one. Thank you very much.
Can I just point out that in the previous round you had four people asking questions from one media outlet.
Questioner number 3 in Cape Town, or are you 2?
We are only 2 here.
Oh, thank you. We will answer those questions. In fact, before we even answer those questions, let's take this round here so that we answer all of them. The lady here, and the gentleman over there, the lady there, gentleman, and the lady at the back, and the gentleman there. Thank you very much. How many are you? But start. You'll be the last one.
Antoinette Slavert from Report newspaper. Minister Mbalula, just about air travel, the industry is in dire straits, and I believe they've approached government for assistance and maybe an exemption from levies and charges for 6 months. Has there been any decision or progress in putting together an aid package for the air travel industry? And then just on post-border cargo movement, can the truck driver continue on his route across the border, or do you need a staff or a driver change on the border? Thank you.
Next.
Yes, Ministers, John Fraser, ZA Confidential. I'd just like to add to that question from Cape Town on from places like Woolworths and other markets, and expand it slightly. What is the position of courier services? Are they banned? Are they allowed? Because courier services do also transport stuff like
pharmaceuticals, essential goods of that kind. Could you just clarify that area? And secondly, in general terms, you're announcing the biggest clampdown on civil liberties in South Africa since apartheid, since the end of apartheid. You're telling us we can't walk our dogs. You're telling us that you're driving to drink, but we can't buy any booze after Thursday night. Has it occurred to any of you ministers that possibly you're going just a little bit too far? You've announced some very sensible things like distancing yourself from your colleagues, yet there's a police officer over there who is sitting well within an unsafe zone of his colleagues. In this particular room, such rules have been ignored. Honestly, there seem to be double standards. You sanitize your podium, and we have to sit here without the sanitization.
But we have sanitized your mic, please. We have sanitized the mic that we have just used now. We are busy sanitizing it. Can we get to the next speaker?
Thank you, Minister. Takwana Dani, Eyewitness News. This one is for Minister Motsoaledi. In terms of foreign nationals who are from neighboring countries who come to South Africa on 30-day permits, some of them are expiring during the lockdown. The Lesotho special permit is expiring during the lockdown. What's going to happen to those people? What should they do? We understand that you're not going to process any documents during this time. And secondly, to Minister Patel, in terms of items that one can buy, people are citing things like cigarettes, that if they're not allowed to buy cigarettes, they might end up buying illicit cigarettes. So are there things like cigarettes, will they be allowed, or other items outside of food that is considered as essential items? Thank you.
Next. Khuluma baba, ngisho ne mic. Oh, okay, sanitizer, sorry. Sorry. Yeah, we are living in difficult times.
Through the wound, Minister. It's Govan here from ENCA. Just like to confirm that if you find people chilling on the corner in the areas you're going to arrest them. And my question really is, where will these people who will be arrested be held? Will you have separate holding cells for non-corona patients, suspected corona patients, and positive corona patients? And how exactly will they be appearing in court? And then secondly, just on to the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Police as well. What was the instruction to the SAPS and the soldiers, and what recourse would ordinary citizens and journalists have when they feel violated by either the SAPS or the soldiers, particularly as the press, because we know that there are rogues within the security service? Thank you.
Next.
Good evening. It's Barry Baton from ENCA. It's just I want clarity on two situations that we've had. The first, what is the status of the citizens who are repatriated from Wuhan? This 21-day lockdown we're going into overlaps with their 21-day quarantine. Are they going to have to stick it out in the hotel until the end of the general lockdown? And then the other issue relates to the asylum seekers living at the Methodist Church at Green Market Square. That's been an ongoing issue. It appears not to have been dealt with, but what's going to happen now that we go into lockdown? Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Rorisang Khosana from The Citizen. What I'd like to know is, since the essential services personnel, such as ourselves and the Defense Force, will be the most exposed during this lockdown, will we also be subject to regular testing? And I've got a question about traditional healers. Where do they fall under? Some people turn to them for healthcare. Do they fall under essential services? Thank you.
Okay.
Sipho from SA. Problematic.
get something that works. Is it working? Okay. Sipho Stroman from SABC TV News. Yeah, my question is similar to that of my colleague. Has the SNDF been trained to handle civilians? We've seen certain videos that seem to suggest heavy-handedness from the police members, from the army rather. And Minister, you've said those videos are fake. But of course, there are fears that the army is not trained to deal with civilians. So in this instance, has there been an instruction in terms of how they should be dealing with civilians in case I'm going to a shop and then I'm stopped by a soldier and they don't believe me that? So has there been training in terms of how they should be handling us? And also, I hear that the Minister of Police says that people that break quarantine rules have been charged with attempted murder. But will police play a role in tracing suspected cases that are not coming forward? So if you know that somebody has tested positive and they were suspected to be in a certain environment with that person, will police play a role in tracing suspected cases? Thank you.
If I'm not mistaken, that gentleman is the last one before we answer.
Thank you, Minister Mthembu. Minister Tele, just for clarification, you said press card. Do we need to fill in the permit as stated in the Government Gazette? And if you don't fill in that permit, can you still move around with your press card? Minister of Justice, is it a difficult debate this, just to follow on my colleague's question, to limit people's right of movement, freedoms that we've got in this country? Was it a difficult philosophical debate for you as Minister of Justice, given the tradition that we've got of individual freedoms? Thank you.
Thank you. You? But looks like these are new hands. Still old hands?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so Vickers Burger from Media 24. Sorry, just two questions. One to the Minister of, both actually to the Minister of Police. The one is, with all due respect, I don't think you answered my colleague from News 24, Alex's question. If I stay in a complex, can I walk in my complex? If I have a sickly mother, elderly mother, can I take food to her? Okay, so that's the one question. I just want real clarity on the movements. I mean, also some people will walk to the shop, so I just really want clarity on that. Then the second thing with regards to the media and doing their job, a lot of people working in the media are not journalists. It is people that distribute different publications, titles, you know, to the different areas. Some are proofreaders that need to go to the offices to do layout, stuff like that. So how are they going to be restricted? Will they also be allowed to go to the office, do their jobs? Or will a letter from an editor or a CEO suffice? Press cards, just clarity on that. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Arisa, I'm also from Media 24. This is also to Minister Tele. We just want to know, what proof will police need if someone wants to move around? In other words, if I am a person and I want to walk to the shop and I tell you I'm walking to the shop, but meanwhile I'm going around the corner to chat with my neighbor, what proof will the policeman need? Will I be allowed to just lie to him or say, when will we be arrested, basically? And on the second question, it's also a question that my colleague Alex from News 24 asked. If a parent has joint custody over a child, right, and the child has to spend 1 week at his mother and 1 week at his father, will that still be allowed? What if the two parents are in two different provinces? They have a constitutional right to see both their parents, so how will this be implemented? Thank you.
I hope that gentleman is the last one now.
Thank you, Minister. Sparrow van der Walt, Beeld and Network 24. A lot of people want to know, will go for a run in the morning or in the evening?
Well, can you repeat that? I didn't hear it, I hope.
I'm sorry.
What?
people that want to know, can they still go for a run in the morning or in the evening or whenever?
Oh, jogging. Baba.
Thank you so much. Francis Logamachata from Progressive Independent News Agency again. Quickly, what measures, to Minister of Police, what measures are in place for business, particularly those who are running and that are outside communities? Because I want to believe that some criminals might actually see this as an opportunity that there won't be a lot of movements within these farms or these resorts and want to use the opportunity to commit crimes. What measures are in place to make sure that actually these farm owners and those who are running businesses in outside the areas, communities, their business?
Thank you very much, colleagues. We don't know whether we should start with you, Babu Cele, with your many questions.
No, thanks. Fortunately, I'm distracted there.
Colleagues, can we allow him to answer?
Fortunately, what has been observed, some of these activities, they go with a serious reduction of crime already. The liquor and all that kind of thing. Maybe I'll mix this question with with what do we do in terms of roadblock. I think both the Minister of Defense and Minister of Police have said that the movements will be highly restricted. That includes the movement of the criminals. We are not going to say we are criminal move. The movement of the criminals, because if we move the entire nation as we are supposed to stay where we are, unfortunately, criminals are part of the nation themselves. So we'll be restricted and don't move on the roadblocks that will be there. And all form of restrictions of movement will also, actually, it might be even better this time in the movement of criminals and the criminality itself as we go for these activities. So be rest assured that there will be less crime, and be rest assured that criminals themselves will fall within the net that will be placed there by the law enforcement agencies. Whether it's a farm, whether it's a lodge and all that, but South African police, supported by the South African National Defence Force. The other question will be answered by the Minister of Defence about their training and all that. But they will be supported. There will be more of the visibility, but also of action on the road and in life general. The NCA, indeed, I think courts are still there and courts will be there. Whoever breaks the law will follow those laws of the Republic of South Africa, that police, SANDF, all other enforcement agencies, things that they can do, including, if it needs be, the other areas like IPIT and all that, as you are correct, saying that they are rocky police. By the way, they are rocky journalists. They are rocky journalists. So I hope we do have mechanism of dealing with rocky journalists. We do have a way of dealing with rocky police and otherwise. So we hope we'll deal with our rookies, you'll deal with your rookies. as the journalist and as the police. There are not too many, Babu Mthembu, as you said. Well, the other one, it's a question of the rank. I think it's Cape Town that asked this question, of rank closed. Everything is closed, except essential thing. If the rank is not carrying the normal en masse movement of those people, will be carrying the people that are supposed to go there. Even those taxis would be essential, because we'll be taking people to hospitals, we'll be taking people to electricity centers, your ESCOM and others, taking people to fix the water. If you look on those things, they are specifically mentioned by the speech of the president, the category of the people that will be moving there. And those kinds of transport become essential, carrying essential people. But if you wake up one morning at 12 o'clock and then you wash, you iron, you put yourself, say, look, I'm going to town today. No, it won't work for you, because you are not essential. That is not the essential movement. So it is on the score, as Minister of Transport has explained. So they'll be moving this transport because of they're dealing with essential matters. People that are inside are essential, and every other movement of those people and transport is exactly the part of the essential movement. So I think those are the questions that have been sent to me to answer. Oh, yeah, I can see that you really want the hand, you get it. You want the arm, you get it. And you want the shoulder now. We have said your appointment, your press, whatever you call it, cards, is fine, is enough. Maybe you help me, you'll still have to show your ID that this card is indeed you. And then thirdly, you asked if we will fill the form. Lastly, last time we requested the people of restaurants to have registers. One major thing of that request, you have raised a very good point, we'll have to fill those forms. Because if the Minister of Health needs to follow you and follow the people that were around you, it will help. Indeed, it's your press card, your appointment card, is your ID, and filling the form for a better traceability where we are going. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, Chief. If we are going to do things this way, can you sit down? Let's sit down. Next answer. So sorry, sit down. But we have not said we have finished with the questions. Can you sit down? Minister of Transport.
The Minister of Trade and Industry has indicated that there are engagements with the retail sector and that there will be due consideration in terms of early opening hours for those who rely on public transport for that. Meaning, having finalized the regulations, there will be directives. So, when the regulations are implemented from today, there could be teething problems there and there. And the situation is under monitoring by the net joints, and directives will be issued by the ministers. So, nothing is cast in stone, but here the main issue is the enforcement of the lockdown. Meaning, you can't think that shops and everything else will be business as usual. Even when you go to the shops will have limited things, essential services. You will not access alcohol in a mall. You will not buy clothes. If you decide to live wherever you are, to go to a mall in East Rand and all of that, it should be for essential service, meaning something that you can't get in your neighborhood. You've got a spaza shop in your neighborhood, buy there. If you want pharmacies that are opened in the malls, that will be provided. In terms of time and the opening of pharmacies to be aligned with public transport, we will engage with the minister and rectify that particular arrangement. But what it means is that let's stay where we live and we buy essential goods where we live, meaning all of us, poor, rich, there is no comfortability. Now, you can't get into an Uber because it is the lockdown, you want to go and have a party with your friends. It's not allowed. Stay where you are for 21 days. So it's not something normal, like people will think that it is normal and all of that. Courier services will operate for essential goods. Again, courier services will operate for essential goods. And cargo for everything, including essential goods, air and maritime will operate. But the crew in those air and maritime will not be allowed to disembark. But the goods that are offloaded will have to be sanitized, especially from risk countries. The country is on a lockdown. Friday, ask me if you see Air Zimbabwe or Air France at our airport, how did it happen? Because from now, in terms of the NOTAM and everything else, everybody, wherever they are, they should know that we're not coming to South Africa for the next 21 days. We are not the only country. Other countries have done it, including China and everywhere else. So that has happened. So, President have directed lockdown 21 days. And in that, we've got people who are using transport for essential services. That's why we say 5 a.m. 5 a.m., we want to allow health workers to catch that early taxi to go to Paraguanath. We want to allow that worker who rely on a bus to go to Eskom. They will be picked up in a power station so that the lights are not off. That is essential service. That policeman who works at the police station, 5 a.m., will have to be there. But for those who want to buy groceries, rely on public transport, and so on, we will look at that with the Minister of Trade and Industry in terms of the distance. But we don't expect everybody in a big township, for instance, Soweto or in Sandton and all of that, to be grocerying to places where you like. It's not possible. Buy next door, buy where you live, in the areas that you can actually access. And those areas will have enough goods, which is permissible in terms of the lockdown, and so on. Truck drivers will be allowed to cross, provided they transport essential service. You will not be allowed to cross. It's a lockdown. It's closed. You will only be allowed to go to Swaziland, to Lesotho, if you are transporting medicine, food, supplies. You'll only be allowed to cross because we have not locked our sister, let me say, countries in the SADC from this arrangement. So that's it. As to what will happen at the border, in terms of exchange of drivers, we don't expect that operationally to happen because you cross and then you come back because you are delivering a service. Reduction of levies for airlines and so on, our entities are considering this, and in the context of our cluster and the framework of economic measures in distress, we are considering that and what we should actually do for different airlines. And the request on payment relief, all of those are considered. And when we have arrived at a decision on those, we will be able to provide concrete answers on those particular issues. So I'm just saying that to clarify once and once again, transport, public transport will operate from 5 to 9 o'clock every day. It caters for essential workers to go to work, okay? From there, for them to come back from work, it will operate from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock. In between that, we don't expect a mass movement of public transport. It's a lockdown. Should you be seen 12 o'clock midday on the street, you've got to have a good reason. Ufuna ndo estradweni. Ngoba sonke sihlele ezindlini zethu. You must have a good reason. You must provide answers that you are transporting people who are sick, or otherwise you are attending to an emergency that you can prove to the police or the soldiers that you are doing something good. But you are expected to be where you are. That's what it is. Now, if we don't even have to say if, because the order is clear, it's a lockdown. In the air, in the maritime, and also in public transport. If you look at what is happening at Park Station, we have not reached lockdown. People are carrying bags, they are getting into the trains, they are going home. There will never be a comeback from there. And number two, you must understand that long-distance transport has already been suspended. Shosholoza Mail, Luxury Gautrain is gone. Rovos is added to the list. Blue Train, you'll see it after 21 days. All of those shut down. So there is nothing that is in favor of the other. Uber, it is expected that you will use Uber for essential service. Essential service, meaning you want to access a clinic, you want to access a pharmacy, you want to access. Even when you get to a mall, malls will be shut down in terms of clothing and all of that. So there's no shopping. There's no shopping. But shops will be open for you to get food, to get medicine, and that's it. And the only thing that makes us to flock in shops is because we want to drink in the bars, we want to buy clothes, we want to do all of those things. Gone. Agamatorogis. Those things are gone. So we must be very clear about that. So that is the lockdown. But the lockdown, in conclusion, Minister Mthembu, must be understood. It's not to punish everybody. It's to reduce unnecessary movement in all spheres. It's going to affect us adversely. President addressed the whole package. Our job is to execute. And we're executing that to the best of our ability, to the extent that our people also must not suffer. But it must affect all of us. Thank you very much.
Minister Magolo.
Thank you very much. You said I shouldn't go close to the mic. Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu. Colleagues, I thought we were agreed that because we are where we are now, in terms of the spiking of figures, remember when we first addressed you, we had about 62 people who are infected by this virus. Exactly 8 days later, we are now at 704 or 2, not sure. And therefore, it means that extraordinary decisions have to be taken to address extraordinary circumstances. The reality is that here, all of us, it's not about being spiteful, it's not about use of excessive power, it's not about demonstrating how powerful the state is. It really is about protecting one another, protecting ourselves from this virus. And I think if all of us agree to that, then some of the questions which have been raised here would not even arise. there's a matter here of fake videos. And I've said the president 2 or 3 days ago directed that on Thursday midnight, right, there'll be a lockdown. For now, we still have about 24 hours, am I right, ministers, before that time. So there is no lockdown. How many? Okay, maybe 30 hours. The point is, there is no deployment of soldiers currently in the streets of South Africa. Abeko, they are not there. And you know this, you haven't seen them. Where you have seen them, you've seen them moving in transit. You've not seen soldiers patrolling, you've not seen soldiers manning roadblocks. And I think I should also emphasize the fact that it was not a mistake when the president declared that we will operate within the terms of the Act, this Disaster Management Act. He didn't say we're going the route of Section 37 of the Constitution, which is a declaration of the state of emergency. And I think members of the South African National Defence Force do understand that we are now deploying because in the first instance, we are protecting South Africans against a virus. That our numbers have escalated and therefore we now have to come in and support the police in enforcing the law by ensuring that everybody remains behind doors. So I think that the members of the South African National Defence Force are educated enough to appreciate that law enforcement in the context of a Disaster Management Act and law enforcement in the context of a Section 37 of the Constitution, which is the state of emergency, there would be a difference between the two. So I think that it starts with us, that we must be responsible and act responsibly, even as the media. Because even this forwarding and circulating of videos which you know are fake videos, because you know they are fake. Let me just clarify something which has come out in the past 24 hours. Somebody goes to Craig Hall, infantry unit, decides when they see the soldiers to raise a question. So what's happening, guys? And one of the soldiers says, we are from Corona. And all of you know what Op Corona is. Op Corona is patrolling the borderline of South Africa. That's Operation Corona. And somebody simply decided that, oh, Op Corona, it means they are deploying right now to support the government's initiatives against Corona. So I'm just saying sometimes it's our own mischief which exacerbates the situation and creates all of the myth and the stories which are all over about what the South African National Defence Force is likely to do. Lastly, if I may remind, it is true that because somebody asked what kind of training, it is true that precisely because the South African National Defence Force is the last line of the defence of the Republic of South Africa, of the people of South Africa. So obviously, they have not been trained in crowd control. That is why most of the time, it is always the last thing we do to say, for instance, like in the Western Cape, when there was a challenge. We resisted and resisted until it got to that point that, okay, let's deploy and support the police. So here now, there is no instability, by the way. There's peace right now in South Africa. There is no ungovernability. We're talking about stemming the tide and stop the spread of the virus. And in doing so, we have to lock down. And in locking down, we have to enforce it if it is necessary, if only to protect all of us who are here in this room right now. So, this thing that members of the Defence Force are people who kick and skip donor and what. It will be skid and donor when circumstances determine that. For now, We are a constitutional democracy. We do understand what our obligations are in terms of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. Our soldiers understand the circumstances under which they are now being deployed. So to spread this thing and perpetuate this thing, Yoguti, they are going to, They are going to torture people, they are going to beat people, they are going to they don't understand human rights. By the way, in their training, they are taught what human rights is. This is a democracy. This is a South African National Defence Force, which is founded on the new constitution, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, not the state of emergency which we had in 1985. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about lockdown and supporting the police in ensuring that that lockdown is enforced. Thank you.
So thank you. Any colleague this side who still want to make it? Yeah, Lamula.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think I received almost 2 questions which are sounding a bit similar. Whether it's, doesn't government think that we are overstretching the liberties or limiting them too much? And the other one was saying, was a difficult decision for cabinet to were the philosophical discussions with regards to the limitation of rights. As I've said from the first press conference that the cabinet was guided by the Constitution. And we were also guided by the inputs or the research advices from the Department of Health that said this is where we are. For us to flatten the curve, these are things that we need to do. And for these things that we need to do, we will then need to limit the rights of people in terms of movement, in terms of various other issues. And that is governed by Section 36 of the Constitution. And we were then guided by what previous court decisions have found about the issue of Section 36. Firstly, whether does this limit the rights of people? And secondly, that limitation, is it justifiable? In the view of Cabinet, this limitation of these rights, it is justifiable because it's in response to a global pandemic that has been declared by the World Health Organization. Then we're able to take the Disaster Management Act and put it with Section 36. Can you restrict movement? Yes. Can you restrict movement of human beings? Yes. Can you restrict movements of goods that are not necessary? Yes. So all those things that we have announced are guided by the Disaster Management Act, which allows us to limit the rights of South Africans. And the philosophical engagement, yes, did take place. To which extent do you limit these rights? It is dependent on what the Department of Health has advised us, that for you to flatten the curve, you may need a stricter restriction of movement. Hence, if you look at all the regulations,